Hi, my name's Jeff Dean and I'm Math Dad. I'm here to help you help your kids understand math. And today we're going to wrap up this first series on fractions. Up to this point, we've talked about how a part and a whole are related. We've talked about using common numerators and common denominators in order to compare fractions. We've talked about different representations of fractions and even how to find equivalent fractions. Well, we're going to pull all of that together and see how having this great understanding of what fractions are and how they work help us do some of the things that we struggle with the most when working with fractions. So, this first thing that we're going to look at is when we're adding fractions or subtracting fractions, why do we need a common denominator and how do we find it to add those fractions? Check this out.
So here's our problem. We have 1 2/3 plus a half. This is what it looks like as a picture. I have a whole, I have 2/3, and I have a half. I could actually write this as 1 plus 2/3 plus 1/2. But there's only one problem. You see, I can't add these two fractions together because they're different size parts. And as we've discussed, we can't put fractions together if they're not the same size part. So what we need to do is we need to cut these up a little bit more. For example, if I cut this one into halves and I cut this one into thirds, I now have the same size parts, which are all 1/6. So what I've now created is I still have my whole, which is 1. I have 4 of these sixths. And I also have 3 more of these sixths. For a total of 1 whole and 7 sixths. Now, this is correct. This is how much I have. But sometimes we don't like to leave it looking this way because we know that this is 7 sixths. And it only takes 6 sixths to make a whole. So if I take 6 of the sixths out of here and make another whole, that now gives me 2 wholes. And since I used up 6 of them, I still have 1/6 left. So that's what I would get as my answer. And you can see, if I was to take this one and fill in here, and I was to take this one and fill it in here, I would have 1 whole, I would have a second whole, and I would have 1/6 left over. So I was able to check my answer with pictures to see that 2 and 1/6 is correct.
I hope what we're starting to see is how developing this understanding of mathematics helps us make sense out of things that may normally cause some problems. It allows us to know what we're doing and not just memorize a bunch of steps. So we're going to take a look at one more example of something in fractions that typically causes a lot of problems, but when you have an understanding, you can get yourself out of pretty sticky situations.
Okay, this is subtraction. And I'm going to show you this one the way that a lot of times we learn rules for, which causes a lot of problems, and then we'll take a look at it from the perspective of understanding. So in a problem like this, one of the things that we have to do is find a common denominator, because when I'm adding or subtracting, I cannot add or subtract without having the same size parts. So when I'm finding my common denominator, I can multiply the top and bottom of this fraction by 3 and the top and bottom of this fraction by 4, because that will give me equivalent fractions of 3/12 with the 1/4 and an equivalent fraction of 4/12 with 1/3. Now I'm subtracting, but I have another dilemma. See, I'm trying to take 4/12 away from 3/12, which I can't do. So what we're taught is we have to borrow. We have to take a whole from here and make this a 4 and add that whole right here. And what that does is now gives us 4 and 15/12. Take away 2 and 4/12. Now I can subtract. 15 of the 12ths, take away 4 of the 12ths, gives me 11 of the 12ths. And then 4 of the wholes minus 2 of the wholes, and I'm left with 2 wholes. And that would be my answer when I do this the way that we're usually taught by using steps. And this is the tricky part right here that gets a lot of people stuck. So if I can't remember that part, what do I do if I'm stuck? All right, here we are. Same problem, but now we're going to look at this from the perspective of what do I do when I have a really good understanding of number sense and fractions, and I want to solve this problem. Well, I can see that here I have 5 wholes and 1/4 of a whole. Here I have 2 wholes and 1/3 of a whole. In other words, I have 5 wholes and I'm taking 2 of them away. What would that leave me with? That would leave me with 3 wholes. And I haven't touched my 1/4 and I haven't touched my 1/3. Now I also know that it takes 3/3 to make a whole. And I want to take 1/3 away. So I can say that I have 2, I have 3/3, there's my 3 wholes, and my 1/4, and I want to take 1/3 away. Well, this 1/3 I can take away from my 3/3. So now I have my 2 wholes, 2/3, and 1/4. So now all I'm left with is using my addition strategies to figure out this part here. So here's my 2 wholes, and I can write my equivalent fractions. As we saw before, 3 and 4, we can use 12ths. So I can multiply top and bottom of this one by 4, top and bottom of this one by 3, and I get 8/12 plus 3/12 for a total of 2 and 11/12. And I was able to do this because I have an understanding of fractions, and I didn't end up getting stuck figuring out how to do all of that borrowing stuff. Not that it's wrong, this is just different, and it shows the power of what you can do when you have an understanding of fractions.
So there you go. Having an understanding of what's happening in mathematics helps us to make sense out of what we're doing and can sometimes allow us to do things a little bit differently. And that's the whole point, because when we only know one way to do something, or we've memorized a process, when we get stuck or we can't remember something, that's it. There's nothing else we can do. But when we have an understanding, we can use what we know to work around the problem and figure things out. And those are the types of math thinkers we want to develop. So, I'm so glad you joined me for this fraction series. I'm Jeff Dean, and I'm Math Dad.